Some moments arrive in your life, not as the loud thunderclap of fate, but as a subtle stirring, like the soft rustle of unseen wings in the air around you. Perhaps you felt it before, in the quiet pause between heartbeats, when the world suddenly seems to grow still, and your thoughts take on a different weight. It might happen while you're pouring tea, or while the evening light slips across the floorboards, in that golden hour before dusk. In that instant, you feel, though you cannot explain, that something beyond your usual perception is leaning in, watching, waiting. When you encounter the phrase, "If you're watching this, your higher self is trying to contact you now," it is not simply an arrangement of words. It is an event, a moment in time, that acts like a key slipped into a lock you didn't know you had been carrying. This is not about coincidence, nor is it about a distant fantasy. It is about the architecture of reality bending toward you, arranging a meeting between who you think you are and the vast, luminous expanse of who you truly are. Your higher self, that mysterious, often romanticized essence, is not some faraway entity sealed off from your human struggles. It is the part of you that has never been diminished by fear, never been bent by circumstance, never been severed from the source of all things. You could call it the witness, the silent observer who has watched every chapter of your life unfold, unshaken, patient, knowing that the script is far longer than the scene you currently inhabit. And yet, while it resides in a realm beyond linear time, it is not indifferent to your present. It longs for union, for dialogue, for a reunion across the bridge of awareness. We live in an age of relentless noise. The modern mind is a marketplace of flashing signs, notifications, obligations, each one clamoring for your attention, each one slicing your focus into smaller and smaller fragments. In such an environment, the voice of the higher self does not compete. It will not raise itself to match the shouting of the world. Instead, it calls in subtler ways, weaving messages into the texture of your days. It might appear as a sudden clarity in a conversation, a pattern in dreams, a line in a book that burns into your mind long after you've read it. Or perhaps, as now, it is a headline, a title, a message appearing on a screen, as though it has been waiting for you to notice it. Think of this as a moment of crossing a point on the river where the currents meet. On one side is your ordinary self, the one navigating appointments, relationships, disappointments, the delicate balance of what must be done and what you wish could be done. On the other side is the higher self, a being of vast perspective, who sees every choice not as an isolated moment, but as a thread in a cosmic tapestry. This crossing is not accidental. You have been walking toward it for longer than you realize. If we imagine the human journey as a spiral rather than a straight line, then certain points on that spiral bring us closer to the center, to the source of who we are. This message you have stumbled upon is one such point. It is not a random loop in the spiral, but a narrowing, a drawing in. The spiral winds tighter not to restrict you, but to bring you into a more direct conversation with your essence. You could ignore it, of course, many do, but something in you knows that dismissing this moment would be like turning away from the door, just as the key finally turns in the lock. In ancient stories, the hero often receives a call, sometimes from a messenger, sometimes from a dream, sometimes from a stranger met by chance at a crossroads. The pattern is always the same. The call seems improbable, even disruptive, but it stirs something undeniable. This is the modern echo of that mythic moment. The higher self is the messenger, and the journey it calls you toward is not outward into distant lands, but inward toward the deepest terrain you have ever dared to explore. The significance of now cannot be overstated. It is not later, It is not when the timing is right. It is now, precisely because the conditions have ripened in ways you may not consciously understand. Perhaps an old chapter in your life has just closed. Perhaps a quiet yearning has been building beneath the surface of your daily routines. Perhaps you have reached a threshold where the questions you've been asking are no longer satisfied by the answers you've been given. The higher self arrives, not according to the clock, but according to readiness, and readiness often blooms in the shadow of the unexpected. This message is both an invitation and a challenge. To answer it, you must be willing to step beyond the mental scaffolding that defines your identity. You must risk the comfort of what you know for the sake of a truth that may rearrange everything. And yet, even as the path ahead feels uncertain, there is a strange familiarity to it, like the way a dream can feel more like home than the room you wake up in. That is because, at some level, you have walked this path before. The higher self is not a stranger. It is your oldest companion. If you are watching, reading, listening to this moment unfold, then the contact has already begun. The bridge between the seen and unseen has been extended, and somewhere within you, a quiet recognition is rising. The question is not whether the higher self is reaching out, it is whether you will take its hand. To understand the deeper message contained in, if you're watching this, your higher self is trying to contact you now. We must first rest upon the foundation of what this truly means. The phrase is not a hollow, mystical slogan. It is a declaration rooted in timeless principles, woven through the patterns of human experience, like threads of gold in a vast and ancient tapestry. When the higher self reaches out, it is not to indulge curiosity, but to realign the compass of your life toward a deeper north, a direction you may have felt but rarely followed. One of the most essential themes here is the contrast between the constructed self and the essential self. The constructed self is the identity you have pieced together over years, a mosaic made from memories, societal expectations, roles you've been assigned or chosen, and the armor you've built to endure life's trials. This self is functional, adaptive, and in many ways necessary for navigating the visible world. But it is not the whole of you. Beneath it lies the essential self, the higher self, that remains unshaken by the shifting tides of circumstance. If the constructed self is the reflection in the water, the higher self is the moon casting its light. The higher self's contact often arrives when the tension between these two selves becomes impossible to ignore. You may feel it as a restlessness, a quiet dissatisfaction, even in the midst of outward success, or as an aching clarity that the life you're living is not the one your soul intended. This tension is not punishment. It is the friction that ignites the spark of awakening. The call is not to abandon your constructed self entirely, but to bring it into alignment with the deeper current of who you are. Another core concept is synchronicity, those moments that seem orchestrated by an intelligence beyond logic. The appearance of this very message might be one. Synchronicities are the higher self's language, a way of slipping past the rational mind's defenses. They do not shout, they arrange. A stranger's words, a repeating number, a sudden sense of déjà vu. All of these can be like breadcrumbs scattered along a path you are meant to notice. The rational mind dismisses them as coincidence, but the intuitive heart knows they are signposts. Equally important is the understanding of now as a living portal. We often imagine time as a river flowing in one direction, carrying us from past to future. But from the vantage point of the higher self, now is not a point along the river, it is the entire river and the ocean beyond it. The higher self calls to you in the present because it is the only place where transformation can truly occur. The past is unchangeable. The future is unformed, but the present is malleable. In it lies the power to shift trajectory, to alter the weave of the tapestry itself. There is also the theme of remembering. Contact from the higher self is rarely about learning something entirely new. More often, it is about remembering something you already know, but have buried under layers of forgetfulness. This remembering is not intellectual. It is visceral. It is like catching the scent of a place you once loved, or hearing the first notes of a song you can't name but know by heart. In these moments, the higher self is less a teacher than a mirror reflecting back the truth you once carried easily, but have since misplaced. Perhaps the most challenging theme is trust. The higher self does not always provide explanations or detailed maps. It will rarely tell you the entire journey before you take the first step. This is not to be cruel, but to prevent your mind from trying to control the process before you've experienced it. Trust here is not blind faith. It is the willingness to act from a deeper intelligence even when the surface mind is uncertain. It is stepping into the fog because you feel the ground beneath your feet will hold. And woven through all of these concepts is the awareness of wholeness. You are not a fragment seeking completion. You are completion itself, momentarily living as though you are fragmented. The higher self's contact is not an external rescue mission. It is an internal reunion. It is the lifting of the veil that hides you from yourself. When you sense its presence, you are not being introduced to something foreign. You are being reintroduced to the truth you have always carried. This is why the moment you encounter this message is so significant. It is not just another curiosity on the timeline of your life. It is a turning point disguised as an ordinary moment. And like all turning points, it asks for your recognition, your willingness to lean in rather than step back. To fully grasp the magnitude of what it means, when your higher self reaches out to you now, it is helpful to step into the realm of symbols and allegories. The language of the higher self is often not direct, for the truths it conveys are too vast for the precision of ordinary speech. Instead, it speaks in images, in metaphors, in the stories that seem to arise from somewhere older than memory. These stories are not mere decoration. They are the bridges between the rational and the infinite. Imagine a vast library with no doors, only windows. You have been standing outside it your whole life, peering in at dusty volumes whose titles seem to shift as you try to read them. One day, without warning, a section of the wall crumbles, and you find yourself inside. The air smells of parchment and candle smoke. The shelves seem to stretch beyond sight, and the books hum faintly, as though they are alive. This library is your soul's memory, everything you have ever been, every lesson your essence has absorbed through countless seasons of existence. Your higher self is the keeper of this library, and its contact with you now is the opening of that wall. The invitation is not to glance around and leave, but to stay, to read, to remember. In another vision, picture yourself walking through a dense forest at night. The moon is hidden, and the path beneath your feet is barely visible. You stumble, your hands brush against the damp bark of unseen trees, and the air is thick with the scent of moss. Just as you begin to question whether you've strayed too far, you notice a faint light ahead, a lantern, hanging from a low branch. As you approach, you see there are more lanterns leading into the distance. Each lantern is a moment of guidance from your higher self, a dream that stayed with you for days, a phrase that seemed to burn into your thoughts, a meeting with someone who changes the way you see yourself. You realize that although the forest remains shadowed, you are not lost. The path has been marked for you, even if you cannot see it all at once. There is also the ancient allegory of the mirror room. In it, you stand in a chamber lined entirely with mirrors, each one slightly distorted. Some make you appear taller, others smaller. Some twist your image into grotesque shapes, others blur you into unrecognizability. These mirrors represent the world's countless projections, the opinions, the judgments, the expectations that shape the constructed self. But at the far end of the chamber is a single mirror, unlike the rest. Its surface is still water. When you approach, the reflection that greets you is not altered. It is clear, luminous, steady. This is the mirror of your higher self, the only reflection that is true. To contact it, you must walk past the carnival of false images and dare to gaze into the quiet, unchanging water. Sometimes, the higher self's communication is like a seed planted in the soil of your consciousness. It arrives as a subtle thought or feeling, barely noticeable at first. But over time, it sends roots deep into your being. This seed may appear in the form of a persistent question, something that will not leave you alone, even if you cannot yet answer it. You may wake up with it, carry it through your day, and find it waiting for you in the stillness before sleep. Such questions are not meant to be resolved instantly. They are meant to grow, to expand you, to break the shell of who you have been, so something new can emerge. And then there are the rivers. In many traditions, the river is a symbol of life itself, ceaseless, moving, shaped by both terrain and source. Picture two rivers on, wide-rushing, filled with debris from upstream, and another, narrow but clear, winding patiently toward the horizon. Most people, without knowing, spend their lives in the first river, swept along by the currents of culture, urgency, and unconscious momentum. But the higher self's contact is like a hand, reaching down into the rushing water, pulling you into the second river, the one that moves in harmony with your soul's purpose. It is quieter, but every bend is intentional. Every ripple, part of a deeper design. These symbolic narratives are not separate from your life. They are occurring now, whether you notice them or not. The library waits. The forest lanterns are lit. The clear mirror stands at the end of the hall. The seed is breaking soil. The second river is flowing beside you. The moment of contact is the moment you choose to step into these stories consciously, to live them rather than pass them by. When the idea of your higher self making contact drifts out of the realm of poetry and into the texture of your everyday life, something subtle but profound shifts. The metaphors and symbols begin to dissolve into the real air you breathe, the streets you walk, the conversations you hold. And yet integration is not about taking the cosmic and shrinking it into something ordinary. It is about realizing that the ordinary has always been cosmic, that the sacred does not stand apart from your daily existence. It moves through it like a hidden current, ready to be felt the moment you choose to pay attention. The first act of integration is noticing. Noticing is not merely seeing. It is the conscious decision to become receptive to the presence of the higher self in the mundane. The way a certain phrase lingers in your mind long after the conversation has ended. The way your body tenses or relaxes in response to a choice even before you have rationalized it. The way a sudden pause in your day feels almost staged, as if life itself is giving you a moment to turn inward. This noticing turns the world into a kind of living scripture, one that is written not in ink, but in the fabric of your experiences. Integration also requires the practice of listening without demanding. Too often we approach the idea of guidance with the unspoken expectation that it will tell us what to do in clear, unmistakable terms. But the higher self does not hand you a list of instructions. It hands you a thread and asks if you are willing to follow it. Listening then becomes a form of trust, not passive waiting, but active openness. You learn to feel for the resonance of a choice, the way a certain path aligns, not with the noise of urgency, but with the quiet hum of truth. In practical terms, this can influence the smallest and the largest aspects of your life. A conversation you would have brushed aside might suddenly become the seed of a new relationship or collaboration. A gut feeling that tells you to pause before signing an agreement might save you from months of turmoil. The pull toward a creative or personal project you've been ignoring might turn out to be the very thing that unlocks a deeper sense of purpose. The higher self's contact does not only aim to elevate your spiritual awareness, it aims to fine-tune the mechanics of your lived reality so that your outer life mirrors your inner truth. The real-world implications extend into how you relate to others. When you are in contact with your higher self, you begin to see people not as obstacles or tools or mysteries to be solved, but as fellow travelers, each navigating their own version of this intricate dialogue between the human and the eternal. This awareness shifts your responses. You may find yourself speaking less from reaction and more from clarity, less from fear and more from understanding. Even in conflict, you may sense the deeper story at play, one that transcends the surface tensions. Integration also changes your relationship with time. When guided by the higher self, you become less obsessed with deadlines that exist only to satisfy external pressures, and more attuned to the timing that emerges from the natural rhythm of unfolding. This does not mean becoming passive or detached from the world's demands. It means aligning your actions with moments of true readiness when the internal and external are in harmony. Decisions made in such alignment often carry a strange ease, as though the universe itself has opened a path. Perhaps the most surprising implication is that your sense of identity begins to loosen. The labels and roles you once clung to, the ones you thought defined you, start to feel less like rigid walls and more like garments you can take on or off. This is not to say that your everyday self disappears. Rather, it becomes more fluid, more capable of adapting without losing its center. In a world that rewards rigidity and consistency, this fluidity can feel radical, even dangerous. But it is, in truth, the beginning of real freedom. Practical integration, then, is not about balancing your spiritual insights with your daily life, as though they were separate realms to be managed. It is about dissolving the illusion that they are separate at all. The higher self does not live only in your meditations, your dreams, or your moments of quiet reflection. It lives in your morning routines, your commutes, your laughter with friends, your silent tears. To integrate is to remember that you are never outside of that contact. You are always inside it, whether you notice it or not. There comes a moment in every life when the ordinary veil of days grows thin and a different kind of light seeps through. You may not notice it at first. It may feel like nothing more than a faint stirring in your chest, a gentle shift in the atmosphere around you. But if you pause long enough to really feel it, you realize something unmistakable. You are being addressed, not by a stranger, not by a voice outside yourself, but by the oldest and truest part of you, the higher self, that has been watching patiently for the moment you would turn your face toward it. The journey we have walked through together, from introduction to the themes and symbols, to the tangible weaving of these insights into daily life, has been about more than ideas. It has been an act of remembrance. To even consider that your higher self is contacting you now is to acknowledge that the line between the visible and the invisible is not fixed. It shifts with your awareness. Every moment, you are either drifting away from that line or stepping closer to it. This moment right here is one of stepping closer. Contact from the higher self is not a mystical luxury. It is not reserved for moments of spiritual retreat or perfect stillness. It is a living presence that flows into your life whenever you choose to meet it. It does not require special words or elaborate rituals or an escape from the messiness of your human experience. It asks only for your willingness to recognize it, to speak back when it speaks, to move in the direction it points, even when the map is incomplete. Perhaps the most transformative truth of all is that the higher self's contact is not an interruption to your life. It is your life stripped of the disguises you've learned to wear. It is the unbroken conversation between the human you and the infinite you, a dialogue that began long before you were born and will continue long after your current story closes. The you reading these words and the you that stands beyond time are not separate entities reaching across a great distance. They are different expressions of the same essence, and when they align, life feels less like a sequence of events you must survive, and more like a song you are here to play. This is the transformational call, to stop treating the contact as a rare occurrence, and to start living as though it is your natural state. To let the symbols and synchronicities not be passing curiosities, but guiding stars. To trust the tug in your chest, even when it leads you away from familiar ground. To remember again and again that the voice you are hearing is not outside you. It is you, speaking from the depth of your own timelessness. So, let this moment be more than another thought you carry for a day and then forget. Let it become the seed of a new way of being, one in which you no longer measure your life only by its visible landmarks, but by the quiet certainty that you are in constant conversation with the part of you that sees the whole path. You do not have to force this shift. You only have to say yes in your choices, in your openness, in the way you hold the next moment when it arrives. The higher self has reached out. You have heard its call. Now, the question that remains is simple, and it belongs only to you. Will you answer